co-host Ed Salek, and the show is in honor of. Now, in honor of deals with veterans issues, but today we want to take another track and we want to expand the issues that we're going to deal with to the whole general public. There are things that have to be talked about, and we're going to do it today. Trust me, we're going to do it today.
I'm president and founding sponsor of what's called Foundation for a Drug-Free World, the Americas Chapter. Why the Americas Chapter? Because the Americas signifies the Western Hemisphere, and the Western Hemisphere signifies freedom. There's not one uncle, aunt, brother, sister in this room that wants their family on drugs. The program empowers youth. It empowers them to have the knowledge of the truth about drugs, because what's the reverse is what the traffickers do, drug dealers do. They give them lies. They have drugs that they have nowadays that's synthetic K2 that they mix with gasoline. The program has certain assumptions that no mother wants their kid on drugs. Is that true? Right. Then no father, no nephew, uncle. That's the assumption. Next assumption, that human beings like to learn. They don't like to be forced. They don't like to be jailed.
This was an exciting event because we had the opportunity to discuss with several multi-stakeholders on the importance of violence prevention. And the program that the Foundation of a War-Free Drugs is doing is fantastic because connect directly on the issue of how youth can be empowered, and through that, how civil society, different organizations can contribute to the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goal from the United Nations.
What Drug-Free World organization do for you, it let you define the good in you. So you focus on what's good for you, what works for you, also how it's going to impact and affect the community and your environment around you.
The Drug-Free World is an amazing organization, and I'm so thrilled to be part of these organizations. One of the things that the expression that stick with me is the impacting the life of teachers and the young people, because the teachers are teaching the young people in school. So if we can train the teachers and train the students, so we will have a better community, we will reduce the crimes, and we will have a chance to save the generation to come.
I thank you for your attention. You can see how much energy exists, and I'll tell you why. It's our kids.
A very special guest with us today is Dr. Bernard Fialkoff. Doctor, how are you?
Thank you for inviting me, Ed.
I thank you for being here. And Doctor, could you give us an idea of what you want to talk about today?
Sure. Yeah, first of all, Ed, you know what? Let me introduce myself. I was born in Cuba, a little Cuban boy, 8 years old, when I came to the country with my mother, who's a pharmacist. My father was a Cuban-trained doctor. And I really appreciated that I had somewhere to go in this world. The United States of America gave me a home. I was very lucky. I went to my dental school here in New York at Stony Brook, became a periodontal dental implant surgeon now for 40 years in the city, and have my wife, have my kids, live in freedom. And so I think it's, first of all, I want to thank you for inviting me in honor of. And the first thing I want to do is actually validate those veterans who are out there for what they're doing and for what they've done. Because if it wasn't for them, I wouldn't have had this country to come to. So one of the things that I think we're doing on this show today is, number one, is recognizing and validating those people in our country who do so much. The veterans who fought in wars, whether they were perfect or not, they were for a reason. They were a symbol. There was America as a symbol of freedom. To me, drugs is the opposite. Drugs is the enemy. Drugs doesn't discriminate. Drugs discriminate. There is none. They affect every race, every creed, every religion. When I was young, I saw how one of my good friends, don't really want to go too much into it because someone may know him, but he really couldn't achieve his potential because he was doing marijuana back then. I went to high school in the 70s, and it seems like I'm prehistoric. And so I remember what happened and how things have changed nowadays. So today what we're going to be doing, as you said, is we'll be talking about something very important, which is this drug epidemic that we have, where in New York we actually have a heroin epidemic in all the counties. And I appreciate you inviting me here, and we're going to start talking about drugs in terms of something that there's a pandemic on right now, which is called vaping or the e-cigarette.
Right.
One of the things let's address something very important right now, because I have kids, and there's people out there who have kids who are watching the show, and I'm sure none of you want your kids on drugs, because you realize innately, without any scientific study, it's not good for them. They're not going to finish school. They're going to lose their girlfriend. They're going to get in fights. They're going to end up in prison eventually. Their life's going to be destroyed. So you went over something that's important to go over, so that even more so is that our country, because really there is a strategy of how you actually undo a country. And a country as great as ours, the United States of America, is very powerful. And when you fight it directly, it actually gets people united. So the last thing an enemy would want is to unite all the people of the United States of America against the enemy.
Right.
So a much easier way, which is something you brought out, which is very important to actually emphasize, is you're right, you're actually correct, is drugs actually have for many, many years, before even now, back in World War II, I won't name the countries, but it was utilized by certain countries to undermine other countries so they could actually take them over very easily, because the people were degraded.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And sometimes I see, and not to be political, but sometimes I see pieces of that in this country, and it's, to me, very scary. Now, I'm 77 years old, and I don't know what the future will bring, but I have a 13-year-old grandson, and God, I'd love to see him grow up to become a doctor or a dentist like you, and have a successful future. Okay. And you wonder if that's going to be available for him.
Absolutely.
That's a very frightening thought.
Absolutely. I was very lucky. My father was a physician. My mother was a pharmacist. So they taught me the drugs were not innocuous. They told me, look, this is what it does. I saw it vividly. And so I always avoided it. But you're right. I saw what the destruction it did with some friends of mine. I really liked them very much. We'd play touch football back in Connecticut and have a great time. But as the years went on and they went more and more into drugs, these guys just went down the chute. And it's a horrible thing that happens with drug use. Yeah.
I feel very fortunate that I didn't have to fall into that category. Because when I was growing up, we had a couple of factors that worked for us. Number one, for the most part, families had one parent working. For the most part. I did too. My mother was like the dictator. She stood up on that porch and she wanted to know where we were, who we were with, be home by this time. And all right, and that worked, okay? So you had one parent at home all the time, okay? The other thing is, I grew up and we had a lot of emphasis into sports. I was out there playing football. Music, loved our music,
Right.
Singing doo-wops on the corner. And that was our lives. It was different. Of course, we did bad things. We drank. We get some cheap rock gut and we drink it until we got silly, and then we'd get out of there and go home before we got caught. that was pretty much what it came down to. So it was different where you weren't being endangered. You were crossing that barrier a little bit and being bad. But by the same token, it didn't have a big pull on you where you had to do that.
You're bringing up some very good points. Something that's important to those watching the show is that we have to take a look, like Ed said, at where we've come from and how much the country has changed. The neighborhoods have changed. I grew up in Manchester, Connecticut, and everybody was out in the neighborhood.
Right.
And all you had to do was go out and play. Now I look around and I basically my kids grew up on Long Island, a nice area in Long Island called Woodbury, and there was nobody on the street, and there was nobody there. People didn't come out, and there was a fear that they couldn't go out, that they'd be abducted, and all kinds of things that were so different. So it broke down the social structure, the family structure, friends, and I've seen that happening. So for those of us out there watching, who are parents, who are grandparents, uncles, whatever, aunts, it's important for us to take a look and see how much things have changed and say, okay, what's our responsibility now as parents, as grandparents? We care for our families. We get together at Thanksgiving. I'm Jewish, so we celebrate this holiday called Passover. That's during Easter time, about, renovation and things coming back to life. And, I think we need to help, regardless of what religion we're in. We have to take a look and say, what do we have to instill in the society, in the family? What advice do we have to give? And, sometimes I think we become a little bit too complacent or a little too easygoing. I found the same thing when I was young. I was afraid of my father. I was afraid of my mother, probably more my mother than my father. I think my father was afraid of my mother too. Yeah. And but there was a responsibility that you felt when you're youth, when you're young. We fooled around. I don't think anyone wants to take that away from youth. I think you're supposed to experiment. You're supposed to enjoy, see, learn right from wrong. That's actually why, by the way, this program that I brought, that we'll talk about later, this Truth About Drugs program, is important, because what it does, it actually empowers kids. It doesn't tell them what to do, but it tells them, okay, look, you want to smoke marijuana. This is what marijuana does. There are these little booklets, you see, and this one happens to be in Spanish because the program is in 22 languages. And what the booklet does is it tells the kid, okay, we're living in a drug culture. Because really, when you and I grew up, we knew the difference between what was right and the drug culture. What's happened today between the media, the movies, all the changes that have gone on, kids don't realize that they've been born. They think that this drug culture they live in is normal. So that's one of the first things the booklet does, is it teaches the kid. And I see that you wanted to relay something, so let me let you say what you were looking at there.
Well, the whole picture of society, you said, mentioned the entertainment business.
Right.
Okay. They watch television. They watch movies. Mm-hmm. Okay. And they have actually corrupted our society. They have made everything wrong that's being done acceptable. This is a very valuable tool out there. But you've got to get it to the kids, and you almost got to put it on a computer so they could sit and, maybe make a game out of it or something.
Which actually, it's interesting that you said that, because this is actually something, this little booklet, this is actually a case of booklets in here, but they can actually get this at drugfreeworld.org.
Right.
And when they go on drugfreeworld.org, they actually can do exactly what you said. There's videos that are called public service announcements on drugfreeworld.org. There's actually little courses that they can do that teach them about the different drugs that they may be contemplating. And like you said, we have to do something and be straight about it so they can look and find their answers.
Yeah, I mean, it's so simple out there. I mean, to get the word out to the kids and get the word out to the parents. And listen, I'll take a moment on and say, get the word out to the veterans. If you're a veteran that's out there, you served your country, you put your life on the line, okay? Now take a look at your family and see who may need your help and your advice to help you help them get away from what they may be tempted to do. And that's temptation. I mean, the easiest story in the world is, and I can remember being a kid, having somebody say, try it. It ain't going to hurt you one time. Mm-hmm. Well, guess what?
Regardless of what occupation or job we have, as a surgeon, I looked at it years ago. I saw that in my dental profession, before all these changes came about 5 years ago with the opioids, the narcotic, the Vicodin, the Percocet, I saw it was being abused. I saw that I needed to do something alternative to giving patients those drugs. So back then I started telling people, look, why don't we try the Tylenol, try some Motrin, try some Advil, and different drugs that were milder, that didn't sedate them, that didn't addict them. One of my friends, who's a veteran, I won't give you his last name because maybe he does, but Manny, Manny had a procedure he went through, and he told me how they gave him all these drugs, but Manny's against drugs, and he actually helps me with a program. And, he said to me, Doc, this is ridiculous. They gave me 30, Percocet, and if I didn't know better, I would have been addicted. I've had this story from other patients when they've had other procedures. So I think the good thing is the professions now have started to regulate prescription, opioid abuse.
Right.
And your point is really well taken. The thing is to realize that all of us really have a role. We can't just leave it that only this profession or only this sector of the society is going to do it. Because if we really look at it, I spoke at the United Nations in 2016, and in that video I said something. I said, no mother, no father, no uncle, no aunt wants to see their kids on drugs. And if those watching this today, if you really ask yourself that question, do you want your kid on drugs? Do you really want him to be vaping marijuana? And we'll go into that in a little bit. What are the effects going to be? So we come to realize is we're protecting ourselves in COVID, but what we don't look at is 72,000 Americans died in the last 4 years, each year. 72,000, 71,000, 70,000. And since about 2017, that's the amount of American deaths each year. When in the entire Vietnam War of 10 years, we lost 60,000. So I say to myself, is the country already drugged down that back then we protested about those boys getting killed, and nowadays we lose that in 1 year instead of 10 years, and nobody really is saying very much.
They should be protesting about these boys being killed and girls.
Exactly.
That's really where it should be.
I'm curious because when you were a policeman and you were on the streets, you must have run around young kids who were on drugs. What did you do with those? I'm curious.
Well, back then, we arrested them. Okay, if you caught them using the drugs, they got arrested. That has all changed because the goal was always to get to the person supplying them with the drugs. Okay, not necessarily that being the answer because there would always be somebody to replace that person supplying them with the drugs, but it was to get into the head of the young kid, and for the most part, the courts would put them into rehab programs. Mm-hmm. Okay, which didn't work as well as they wanted them to. Mm-hmm. Okay, unfortunately, they were a failure. And then the political atmosphere and the atmosphere from the media and the atmosphere from the Hollywood types made it acceptable to do what they're doing.
It made it chic.
Yeah, exactly. Chic is a good choice of words for it. But it's we arrested them, and we hoped to get them some sort of help. Okay. Mm-hmm. And that was always the end goal, was to get them some sort of help, and you had to depend on the courts to do it with you. And after a while, the courts got bogged down with so many of these arrests that the machinery just slowed up, and they didn't get to the rehab part successfully.
Right. Well, you know what? To answer something, because there's been a void, and you're touching on a subject that's very important, is how do we control this? Because like you said, you saw that putting these kids, arresting them, okay, you didn't want them to think it was right, but you don't want to take a kid and just arrest them. Yeah. But at the same time, we don't want to just say, okay, do whatever you want, because then there's no kind of right or wrong. Well, we lose all shades of any color.
Tantamount to that, you don't need a mayor coming out, and I'm not being political, but I'm just generalizing. You don't need a mayor coming out and saying, no more arrests for drugs. We can't tie the courts up. And no more incarceration for drug users. because we can't tie up the prisons. So why don't we just set them free and stop making these arrests, and the system will work itself out? And that's the attitude of the people that are supposed to be leading us. That's frightening.
Well, I tell you what, let's give an actual conclusion of the United Nations, which actually you're bringing up some points. In 2016, the United Nations had a conference, a global drug conference, where you had presidents, ambassadors, all different kinds of high-level national, international opinion leaders. They all spoke. It was a 3-day conference because they were looking at like what to do globally, because they realized there's a global problem. And I want to actually let you know about someone very important and what he wanted me to share on this program from Colombia, from the country of Colombia. But this United Nations 2016 called UNGAS, World Conference on Drugs, came up and they realized internationally we had tried incarceration, arresting. Some countries had the death penalty. And all of them saw that the problem was expanding. So they all realized, okay, what do we do? And all, one for one, realized that prevention and education were going to be the key. They realized that it wasn't going to be a one-shot thing. It was going to take time, but it was the solution, that education and prevention. So, you know, that's why I'm very happy to be here with you with this program, because this Drug-Free World program is exactly that. Let me say one thing so I can just get this whole concept, because I want to give you a statistic. In 2016, through the use of this program, we achieved a 19% reduction in teenage drug usage. Obviously, teenage drug usage is what we want to decrease. This program, to give credit to a lot of people who've been involved in it with me, one is my daughter, Megan, who has worked on the program with me. The other one is my wife, Maria, who helps on the program. You know, it's a family thing. Also, my office staff has helped on the program. And I want to recognize, you know, as a police officer, the National Latino Police Officer Association with Anthony Miranda. They have helped on the program. The Dominican Police Association, you know, many other organizations have contributed. There's a lot of athletes. Bobby Hunter, who's a retired Harlem Globetrotter. We've gone through different Super Bowls. You know, we have Noah Burrows, who's a New York Jet.
Right.
He realized he should contribute. And, you know, recently, if you look nationally, before the last Super Bowl, you know, Marshall Faulk,
Right.
who was a tremendous athlete, is out there. And Marshall Faulk has really contributed to the program and put himself out and said, you know, we need to do something. Because really, you know, I think one thing that's important to state is what we need to do, all of us, is start working together and educate. The United Nations already came up with that's the solution. So what we need to do, and this is just something personally that I feel, we need to stop criticizing. We need to stop pointing fingers. And like you did out when you were out and, you know, you were in the Navy, you had to fight the enemy.
Right.
So I think that we all need to realize that if we take a look at this, who is the enemy that we really face? So if we look at our kids, obviously the enemy is drugs. And so we want to fight drugs. Last thing I want to mention before, you know, I don't mention him, General Serrano, who actually was given the award of Policeman of the World, who actually was the one who stopped the whole Cali cartel in Colombia and was in charge of Colombia. He goes all around the world educating. He wanted to actually say something. And General Serrano said, this is not a family problem. This is not a city problem. This is not a community problem. This is not a national problem. He said, with synthetic drugs, with the increase of drug usage worldwide, and especially now with COVID, he said, we have an international problem where all countries need to get together and educate. He said, I've lost so many of my friends enforcing, so many kids I saw die. He goes, it's enough of that way of, we have to educate, enough of the other way. Let's educate, let's use drug-free world. And, you know, this is a message I want to relay that he has mentioned to me several times because you know that we go around educating.
And you have a difficult task ahead of you with that.
You know, as a surgeon, there are times when I do surgery. It's a great question. And the surgery is very difficult. And the patient's very nervous. And because they've had bad experiences in the past, they're very defensive. And it's very difficult in the mouth, with the tongue, with the saliva. And I happen to do periodontics and implants, which involve surgery. So now you have bleeding. So there are times where, as a surgeon, it's not easy. It's like if you're flying an airplane for JetBlue, I'm sure there are situations they go through that they don't tell the passengers when they're flying that plane.
Right.
Like you when you were out as a policeman out on the street, things you don't say. So you have to get through. So, you know, a few things that I use is points of reference that I want to share with the viewers. One is that absolutes are unattainable. We're never going to get an absolute. We can strive in a direction, which is what we should do. But we shouldn't look that it's got to be absolute. And then the other thing is, that's very important, that's another good saying, is that the way through something, the way to solve something, that the way out of it is the way through. That we can't reverse or go sideways or go backwards, but we have to go through. And then by going through, we actually get and solve the problem.
When you're trying to reach, let's say you're trying to reach an 18-year-old, 17-year-old, who's falling into the grasp of whatever kind of drug you want, okay? Now, when I was growing up, you know who you'd use to help for that?
No.
The parents.
Yes.
Nowadays, if the parents have the same problem,
Yes.
okay, how do you get them to help their child from disintegrating his life
If they're using themselves.
if they're using themselves?
That's a great point. Let's touch upon that for one moment. When I first started doing this program, I got an awakening because I really had a perspective that was totally wrong. Maybe I was a little bit idealistic, but I thought that, okay, no problem, we'll show the parents, and then everything will be fine. And after about 8 years of doing the program and doing it at schools, and then again, this wasn't myself. This is the other thing I want to make. It was a group. This took a group effort. It's not, I'm here representing that group. It doesn't mean that Drug-Free World America is me. No, I'm just a representative. I think that's one of the things we have to spread in the society is which I found in the 60s and 70s when I grew up as a teenager. It seemed like it was more of a group. Everybody worked together.
Right.
You realize that these lights were being, somebody was in Con Ed or in Lilco or Staten Island Gas or Electric, whatever it is here in Staten Island. There's somebody at that factory, or that building. Next door, there was a company, I don't want to do any marketing for anyone, but there was a telephone company next door. There's people there who make cellular service available for New York people. There's people who wear food. We saw this recently with food. People got very concerned with shortages of food during this COVID. Well, who said that that farmer was supposed to be the only one suffering in the cold or in the rain or in the heat? Why is it that that farmer, who's such a nice human being, whether it was a male farmer or female farmer, those people work hard. We need to realize, to acknowledge them, take care of them, because if we don't have food. If we don't have food, who survives? So the point is that I got a rude awakening when I thought that parents were not on using drugs. But this started in the 60s and the 70s with the rock revolution, and like you mentioned with TV, media, Cheech and Chong, little by little, people started thinking drugs were okay. Why they thought they were okay? Well, there's a mechanism in every human being. Everyone is subject to it. You know, when you start doing things little by little, you know this as a policeman, I'm going to let you talk about this, little by little, you start losing yourself. You start doing something called justifying. With a drug epidemic, as I gave more presentations, so I started realizing the problem I was running into was that the people in charge, unfortunately, I may not make people too happy out here watching this, but it's the truth is the truth, that the people who were supposed to be educating, unfortunately, themselves were already using the drugs. And since they were using the drugs and they justified, then they had difficulty enforcing discipline. But when you have a group and you don't have discipline, you don't have a group anymore. Whether the group is the police, the group is the Mothers Association, the PTA, or the country, the group starts dissolving from lack of discipline and education.
And they weren't delivering the message.
Right.
That's, so I'm very interested in finding out a little bit more about the program. Can you lead us into what the program is?
Absolutely. Let's talk about, today, let's talk about something that's an epidemic right now. It's called the vaping epidemic, e-cigarettes. We started the talk today talking about that. And as a dentist, I've seen that in my office. It has certain effects in the mouth. The gums recede, the tissue gets dry, they develop gum disease. So let's talk about vaping. And vaping is an electronic cigarette, and that was originally the solution for cigarettes. It became a very popular alternative, and in recent years has really skyrocketed in terms of usage. So it's very important to realize something, is that between 2018, 2019 by itself, it increased in usage 80%. You're talking about e-cigarettes increasing in usage 80%. You're talking about a tremendous sector of the U.S. population vaping.
And when you see stores, I see stores in all the strip malls, e-vape, and there's different names. It's a big thing all of a sudden.
Exactly. I don't want to help market any of them. There's one in particular I'm sure everybody probably thought I was going to mention, and I'm not going to mention. Very popular. And so let's talk about vaping. And let's first start out with not even vaping marijuana, but just vaping with a flavoring. And one of the things that, a kid may tell somebody watching, your teenager may say to you, come on, Mom, come on, Dad, I'm just vaping for the flavoring. I'm not smoking cigarettes. And, they'll tell you, I'm not going to use marijuana. I know better, Mom and Dad. Sometimes it's difficult to see that someone can, to your face, tell you something that's not true, but that's the other thing I've had to learn. So let's confront that. And so when he says that to you, I want to actually arm you. And those of you who are teenagers, I thought I was invisible too when I was a teenager. And thank God I listened to some of the things my parents told me, so that later on, now I'm 66, and people say, you're 66, you look pretty good for 66. And I go, well, there's certain things I've always done. So let me kind of share those things. So one thing is that the flavoring in these vapes are not innocuous. In fact, one of them is a very interesting story, because then I'll ask you a question. When you went to get your videos, did you ever go to Blockbuster?
Yeah.
Okay. So years ago, when my kids were growing up, it's about 20 years ago or so, everybody was getting Blockbuster videos. You go to get videos. And when you were there, what else did you get? What'd you pick up so you could have?
Popcorn.
Popcorn. Exactly, popcorn. So you'd have popcorn. And, I don't know if I didn't really like butter-flavored popcorn, but my family did. So we got butter-flavored popcorn. I didn't think much of it back then. And we were having all this butter-flavored popcorn. But very interesting is the factory workers who made the butter-flavored popcorn developed all kinds of respiratory illnesses. Some had cancer. And they actually ended up developing something called popcorn lung.
Really?
Popcorn lung. Now, that was from inhaling the aerosols and the air in the factory that made the butter flavor for the popcorn that we all got when we bought these videos. Now, something very important to realize is they got those diseases from being in the factory. Obviously, in the factory, it wasn't super concentrated because you had a big room. But let's take a look at something now. Now we're vaping. And when we're vaping those same flavorings. And those flavorings, when you're vaping, are not in the room, they're right here.
In your lung.
Directly into the lung.
Yeah.
Directly. Not in the air, into the lung, at highly concentrated, ingredient that already caused this in the factory workers. The truth of the matter is, and I won't tell you her name, but a very great teenage dancer on Long Island, she started a foundation. And one of my friends who works against drugs, who's a physician who talked in Long Island, I saw his presentation, and he brought out how this girl almost died from vaping, and that she recovered, thank God, and she developed this popcorn lung. She decided to make a foundation for other teenagers that she speaks against vaping. So, you know, in my laptop here, I just wanted to mention a few things scientifically. The cinnamon flavors, those are cinnamaldehyde. It's also called 2-methoxy-cinnamaldehyde. The cherry flavors, that's benzaldehyde. And, you know, that's in the cigarettes. That's in the flavoring. So when you vape, if your kid tells you, well, I'm just going to have the flavoring, Mom and Dad, now you realize you can tell them that's not such a good thing to do. Let's go into something more on this, on the vaping. So with the vaping, there's another factor that's important. Even though the flavorings say nicotine-free. So I was really curious. So I bought a few bottles to look at. And I was giving a presentation up in the Bronx, in a Bronx high school. And they had some stores there. So I figured, let me stop and check out these stores where they sell this vaping. And I went to a store, bought a few bottles. And with Tamik, who did our videos, we were looking at the bottles. And Tamik goes, did you check this out? I said, what's that? It says nicotine-free, but on the list of ingredients, the first ingredient is?
Nicotine.
Nicotine. And we looked at the other bottle, and the first ingredient on the nicotine flavoring was?
Nicotine.
Nicotine. Nicotine. Now, something very important to realize is that vaping, unfortunately, is not regulated totally yet. And the problem is it's not really totally regulated, and something that's being looked at by the U.S. government. Unfortunately, these products are out there and they're not regulated like some other things are regulated in our society. So these kids are vaping, they're getting the flavorings, and then they're getting nicotine. Now let me go over the nicotine now, because people say, well, okay, so nicotine, it makes you stay up or whatever. But let's look at nicotine, because nicotine is what caused all the cancer in cigarettes, caused the addiction. So obviously we find nicotine in tobacco, we find nicotine in cigarettes, and we find nicotine in the flavoring of the vapes, and we find nicotine also in these devices that we'll go into if we have time today or maybe the next show, where they concentrate the marijuana and smoke it, right? But let's just, for today, let's just look at the nicotine. And, you know, the nicotine you inhale into your lung, gets absorbed into the circulatory system, and what happens is it goes up into the brain, and in the brain, it affects the pleasure centers. And the way nicotine works, it then affects the pleasure centers to release dopamine. Dopamine is like a narcotic. It's like an opioid. It's the body has, within the body, through God, through the way the body developed, the body has its own pleasure and reward center. And so when you exercised and you get that runner's high, it's because the body released its natural opioids. It's called endorphins. And when you see somebody you love, you get that rush of good feeling, and the body releases those things naturally. So one of the things while we're talking about this is that we have to somehow start educating on just that pro-survival, positive actions lead to good feelings, lead to better health. We could give a whole talk on that, and I could tell you about gum and implant success over years and stress. And stress is basically what is not really living a positive life. Living too much negativity, it affects you. Let's get back to the nicotine. So the nicotine gets all this release of these pleasure, dopamine, goes out, you feel good, but like we all know, then you go down. So what is obviously now, and you know as a police officer, they want it again. So they vape again with the nicotine. It goes back up into this brain. And little by little, what starts happening, the body gets accustomed to nicotine. And when it gets accustomed to nicotine, it stops producing it.
That's right.
The dopamine.
They have to intensify.
So they have to intensify it more. Then they intensify more till you get to a point that I think the viewers realize where that doesn't work anymore. So now they intensify some more, but now they're just working to stay normal. Now they're not even getting high anymore. Now they're doing it because they're addicted. The body somehow got fooled into thinking it needs it, but now it doesn't even get a pleasure. So now since that doesn't work anymore, now they turn to intensify with other drugs.
Right.
And so then you have what's called gateway, and there's a lot of supposed controversy about the gateway for the same reasons you and I know why there's controversy. But the reality is that it does lead to gateway, and they then go and use something else. Why? Because what they were using before doesn't give them a high anymore.
So then they go to recreational marijuana, which is being approved by governments through states throughout the country. I mean, Colorado and there's a whole host of other states. Now, when they're using recreational marijuana, doesn't the same rule apply that eventually they'll reach a gateway for something different?
That's a very good point. Let's go over some statistics. And, you know, on this show, we can get so far, and we'll have another show. But let's use Colorado. Colorado, you know, legalized marijuana a while ago. And so let's look at some statistics from the Rocky Mountain High-Intensity Drug Trafficking Area Agency. So what that is that for those of you who don't know, that's the federal agency that monitors drug statistics. It's not a private agency. It has no bone to pick, has no commercial interest. It's looking at safeguarding Americans as a governmental agency. So the results of that agency showed, number one, is that hospitalizations went up about 49% because of marijuana. Car accidents associated with marijuana use, about 48%. Emergency room visits, 33%. Poison control center calls, 100% increase.
Right.
Increase. Now, supposedly, one of the reasons Colorado say, well, we're going to legalize because then you're going to eliminate the fact that you can't get it, so people will stop using it because there's not that enticement that I'm doing something against the law or against, you know, some rule. You know, supposedly, that was going to make it better because by eliminating that suppression or that the fact you couldn't get it, that you could care less and you wouldn't use it anymore. But let's take a look at the fact, again, found by this agency. They found that after legalization, marijuana usage in young children went up, in teenagers went up, in college students went up, in adults went up, and all of them went up to number one in the country. So as soon as they legalized, Colorado went up to number one in every age group in terms of marijuana usage. So the fallacy then, obviously, is that legalizing it means people won't use it as much.
Right. There are people, segments of society, that just want to make money and they don't care who they sell to.
Exactly. I think that, my personal opinion, in dentistry and in the health profession, we have malpractice. And if we don't do the right thing, then we actually can have a suit brought against us. We have our own peer review committees, and our own colleagues say, you know, what you did wasn't right, and then you have to be corrected. This exists in all of the health professions. One of the things that needs to happen is there needs to be something like that in terms of drugs, where those people who are marketing and are giving false information that's not based on actual truthful statistics, pay a penalty for giving false, you know, information.
Right.
Now, I'm not talking about taking away anyone's freedom to speech or rights, because it's important not to do that. But if someone over a long-term period, if you were coming to my practice and I mistreated you, and then your friend, I mistreated them, or I had another patient and did something similar, after a while, it's a pattern. I think as a policeman, I think you realize that when you had somebody who was just like, I know one time I was going too fast in an area, and I was upset about something. And I thought I was going to get a ticket. The policeman stopped me. He came over, and I said, you know, I was going too fast. I was really upset about this and that. I don't know what to tell you. And I don't know, very interesting, I guess, because as a policeman, he knows all the time when somebody's telling him the truth or not. He looked at me. He said, okay, look, slow down. He gave me everything back. He wasn't mean to me. He didn't try to do anything. He didn't just write a ticket because he had some quota, supposedly. He let me go. And, I said, that actually hit me.
Right.
Because it doesn't always have to be negative. It could be positive. I said, you know what? People can be good. There are a lot of good people in the world. And
This is true.
And I said, it's not so horrible. And so that's something important to realize, is that all we have to do is take a look. And when we have someone who's really abusing, okay, it's important for us as a society to say, look, you got to stop. Or if you don't stop, we're going to exert some justice action on you.
Yeah.
I think it's normal. I think that needs to happen. Let's talk about something statistically again, so that more than half of high school students who use marijuana report that they use something called dab, the dabbing. Now, what is dabbing? Dabbing is actually this device that concentrates at a very high heat smoke, and you put the marijuana into that device, and then dabbing is actually inhaling that.
Right.
They call it a dab rig, and we'll show you that, and you can see it. And that dab rig actually is something they utilize that's even worse than vaping. Why is that? Because then the levels of the ingredient in marijuana that make you high, which is THC, tetrahydrocannabinol, gets to 70 to 90%. When I went to high school, marijuana had a THC level of 1-2%. As years have gone on, it's going up and up and up. Now when you buy marijuana now, it's about 15, 20, can be 25%. That's very high already. But now you concentrate that with vaping or with this thing called a dab rig, and now you're talking about a THC level of 70 to 90% that we'll go over more on the next show, because it's causing tremendous problems with psychosis, with gateway, with health in terms of the heart, lots of things that are going on. Something very important that I would like to do in the time that we have, and that's that I have a video here that I would like to play for our viewers, which is, this is the Surgeon General of the country.
I'm very, very concerned as Surgeon General at how far and how fast we're going on marijuana in this country. Very concerned. Number one, this isn't your mother's marijuana. Marijuana a decade ago was 5% THC, single digits THC. You now have professionally grown strains that are 20, 30% THC, and then they're concentrating them into oils, into waxes. They're vaping and they're dabbing them, they're shatter, and you're getting 90, 95% THC. It's like the difference between you having a glass of wine and a pint of grain alcohol. It literally is. And so we've normalized this idea of marijuana use across the country way too fast, to the point that in communities in California, there's 1 in 5 pregnant women, 20% of pregnant women reporting that they are using marijuana during pregnancy. Youth attitudes are changing about marijuana across the country. And I want you to hear me say this as the nation's doctor. There is no such thing as medical marijuana. And I see some eyebrows raised out there. We don't talk about medical foxglove. We don't talk about medical opium. There is no other substance out there that, as a physician, we say grow it in your backyard, crumble it up, bake it into a brownie, or roll it into a cigarette and smoke it, and that's going to be good for whatever ails you. There are over 100 components of marijuana, some of them which have medicinal properties and medicinal promise, and we need to make sure we push for the research so that we can say to each individual, this component has been proven to be beneficial for your disease, and here are the risks and the benefits. But I think we have to have the courage to have a more nuanced conversation, particularly with so many folks out there coming out in favor of legalization with an election coming up. And from a social justice point of view, I'm terribly concerned about the injustice, the fact that black men are 4 times as likely to be arrested as white men for marijuana usage. But you already have a liquor store and a smoke shop on every corner in every black community. I don't know that adding a marijuana dispensary to that mix is going to fix all our social justice ills. And right here in Colorado, I've talked to some of your police chiefs who are saying that, so here's the problem. The problem isn't the law that marijuana is illegal. The problem is, from a social justice point of view, is racism and bias.
So that's something very important to realize, because that's the Surgeon General. So that's the person in charge of our country. And it's not an opinion. He's basing that on facts. The National Institute of Health has come out with tremendous number of facts that we'll go over in the next show where we do this. But we have to take a look at what he's saying and realize that with what I just told you about the high THC levels, with the nicotine, with the flavorings, and the fact that this has become an epidemic with youth across the country, that what's going to happen to our kids? I mean, we're going to lose a whole generation, if not to physical damage to their bodies, mental damage. Because the National Institute of Health, Dr. Nora Volkov, who's the director, basically has studied this and shown that marijuana usage leads to effect on teenage brain development, that the IQ goes down, not transiently, not temporarily, but permanently. And then I always make a joke sometimes when people don't get this. I say, well, you know what? I guess since marijuana is okay and you come to see me, some days my office is very stressful. I may come in and say, nice to see you, Ed. Wait right here, Mr. Salek. I'll be right back. I want to relax a little bit, and I'll be back. And then if I walk back into that operatory and you see that I was smoking, you smell the marijuana, I say to you, would you want me to do your dental implant? And the answer would be?
No.
No. Why?
You're high.
Good. Now we go, and we shouldn't discriminate, so we're going to go to JFK or LaGuardia. And pilots have rights too. Everyone has rights. And pilots, I'm sure, they fly all day long. They can, by the end of those few days of flying, they're tired. So maybe they feel that they want to do something to alleviate their stress. And you see him walking in with that thing that they roll behind them.
Yeah.
And you see him smoking something. And you see everybody else looking at him at the gateway. Would you go on that plane?
No.
No. You don't want a Disney World ride, right?
No.
No, neither would I. So we look at that and we go, so we take that, we combine it with 72,000 Americans being killed every year in the last 4 years, every year. We combine that with the fact that the flavorings in the e-cigarettes are toxic to our kids, the fact that it's going right into the lung, the fact that the Surgeon General is telling you that about marijuana himself and the danger of it, that it's totally unstudied, and that we're being too lenient, and you say, what's going on? You say to yourself, in the state of New Jersey, which about 10 days ago, I think, or 2 weeks ago, legalized marijuana by a vote of 70%, about 67%, I think, to 33. And I go to myself, I've been too slow. You and I have been too slow in having this show. Hopefully they watch it, and they wonder what they've legalized. I want to say something, because sometimes I feel, like you said, that things aren't straight enough. There's lots of ways to make money. You come to my office, I could just kill you and take all your money. I guess if we get far enough with justification, that would be okay. It's a little ludicrous to think it, but some of the things that have been happening in our country seem a little strange to me compared to where I grew up. So what I say is this. If we take a look at what we really need, if you took all the money in the world and you didn't have very many people left to grow food or heat the houses, and it got cold like the other day. It was cold the other day. And those guys at Loco or Con Ed or Staten Island Electricity decided they didn't want to work anymore because they wanted to get high. And you're freezing to death in your house, and maybe some elderly or homeless who couldn't even get into a building to get heat, they died. And maybe you knew one of them. And even if it's 1%, 20%, 40%, it hits home when it's someone that you know.
Exactly.
So to me, the point is this. Do we want to organize our lives on avoiding everything and on economic factors, or are we going to actually do something that's going to be good for the society, for the family, and educate, and provide jobs? I think people need jobs. I know when I'm sitting around and I feel bored, I don't feel really very good about myself. So I think we have to provide jobs. I have to provide sports. We have to provide activities and provide that for each other. And, and if there's someone in the neighborhood who's doing something that goes against everybody in the neighborhood, that as a group we say, hey, look, you know what, why don't you stop that? And if there's a great video that I've seen where they knocked this teacher down, and these bullies are going to beat him up because he was being a good guy. And all of a sudden, all these kids, about 60 kids, they're not big, they're not muscular, they're not tall, but 60 of them get around this teacher who's on the floor. And the three bullies see all the kids. And because there's so many, it's like, they realize it's not going to be a good situation, and they leave the guy alone.
Right.
So I think it's time for the majority to look at like what's good for our kids, what's good for our country, and we tell these bullies, that's it, no more, and we protect people who do good things for us. We validate them, like the Con Ed, like you having the show, and the other people here at the station.
Right. And if we keep it up in the direction we're going, we're inviting ourselves into another pandemic. But instead of a pandemic for the virus, the pandemic for what the drugs, the opioids, the marijuana, and the vapes are going to do to society.
Absolutely. Before, there's one thing, I know we have very little time left, but there's a video that's part of this program, and I would be remiss if I didn't show this. We don't have much time, but let me show these two, because you're right. And I think the videos will sum up very well. These are from this program that Ed and I have been talking about that you can get at drugfreeworld.org. It's called Drug Free World Americas. And here we go with the first video.
They said one hit wouldn't hurt. They said one hit wouldn't hurt.
They lied. Get your kids the truth about drugs. Drugfreeworld.org.
They said synthetic drugs would give me a safe high. They said synthetic drugs would give me a safe high. They lied. Find out the truth about synthetic drugs. Drugfreeworld.org.
So there you go. Those are some public service announcements from this program, Drug Free World, that you can get for free at drugfreeworld.org. Ed, I want to really thank you for initiating this series.
It's been my pleasure to be here. And, well, you've been watching In Honor Of. It's a special edition of In Honor Of, and we're going to come more to you. For your family, for everybody in your life, I ask you to please pay attention to what we've been talking about, okay? It's there to help you, and it's there to help this country and to help this world. And we certainly don't want to see it get more negative than what it is already. Thank you.